Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of the Spanish Football Podcast. I'm Phil Kitromilides, joined as ever by Sid Lowe. Hello, Sydney.
Good morning, Philip, or good afternoon, rather. Sorry.
Hello. Sid has just stepped off a train and raced home, arriving back from Valencia, where he was last night at the big game of the weekend. We'll talk about that in just a moment. The big game of the weekend that actually took place.
Yeah.
Here's what's happened. On Matchday 23. Friday night saw Osasuna continue their excellent run of form. They won 2-1 at Celta Vigo, 10 points from a possible 12 for Los Rojillos in their last 4 games. Saturday was supposed to be a special day for us. It was Rayo against Oviedo. First time these two sides have met in Vallecas in La Liga since we've been working together, since we've been doing the podcast. We'd organised all sorts of stuff, but it was postponed. More on that in just a second, and even more on that in this week's TSFP diary for patrons at patreon.com/TSFP. Then after that, Barcelona beat Mallorca by 3-0. Took a while to get going, but they did get going and played pretty well, scoring some nice goals, not least Lamine Yamal scoring in a 5th consecutive game. And Real Sociedad beat Elche by 3-1 at San Sebastian. It is 8 matches now unbeaten for Rino Matarazzo as manager of Real Sociedad. He hasn't lost yet, the American doing fine work. Then on Sunday, Getafe, they're just never going to go down, are they? They're not. They're going to survive always.
Yeah.
They're never going down. They beat Alaves 2-0 at the Estadio Mendizorroza.
Would it be fair to say that they are the cockroach that would survive a nuclear war?
Your words, not my words.
Yeah, I know, because people will be very unhappy about the unflattering comparison with a cockroach, but it is that incredible ability to survive when you just think it can't keep happening, but it does.
Athletic Club beat Levante by 4-2 in Bilbao. Levante playing with 10 men from the 18th minute onwards after Alan Maturo was sent off. Some unbelievably good goals in that game. Sevilla 1, Girona 1 is a game that Girona really should have won. They scored after 2 minutes from Thomas Lemar. They dominated Sevilla, but somehow Sevilla managed to equalise in the 92nd minute, an absolute screamer from Quique Salas, only for Girona to be given a penalty in the 97th minute. Christian Stuani came off the bench specifically to take the penalty and missed. So it finished Sevilla 1, Girona 1. But my word, Sevilla are in all sorts of trouble. And Atletico Madrid 0, Real Betis 1. Football is weird and brilliant and fantastic and infuriating. Betis had lost 5-0 to Atletico Madrid in the Cup on Thursday evening. So obviously they went and won 1-0 at the Metropolitano, becoming the first team to win a league game there this season. And the Sunday night game saw Valencia beaten 2-0 by Real Madrid, the game that you were at, Sid. Monday Night Football is Villarreal Espanyol. Now, have you joined us at patreon.com/TSFP yet? Patrons get the Monday and Friday podcasts without any ads, and they also get a weekly Q&A pod and a bonus pod. And there's the newsletter, the diary, the Discord. You can join us and sign up from just €4.75 a month, or it's even cheaper if you get annual memberships. If you like Spanish football, come and join us. Patreon.com/TSFP. Rayo against Oviedo. Like I said, we did a TSFP diary entry for patrons, giving our sort of feelings about the suspension and just talking a little bit about everything we'd sort of gone through to try and organise us going to this game, because it was actually quite a big event for us, but it didn't happen. How has this happened, Sid? Just explain to listeners who might not be au fait with the actual story behind this, what happened and why.
Yeah, let's try and start without the editorializing, which will come next.
Yes.
And I'll try and make this as clear-cut as I possibly can. Rayo Vallecano have been complaining, or their players have been complaining, their manager, about the state of the pitch all season. They last played against Osasuna, I think, on the late January anyway. I'm not exactly sure which date it was now. And they decided they would relay the pitch. They began relaying the pitch this week, I believe on Tuesday, and on Friday they weren't quite finished yet. The first team at Rayo Vallecano was due to train on the pitch on the Friday. The players said it wasn't safe to train on. It wasn't entirely finished. It wasn't safe to train on. And they put out a statement via the Players' Union saying that the facilities at the club are not worthy of a first division football club. Now, it wasn't just about the stadium. It was about the training ground. It was about all of those things that we've talked about many times over the years. So that's on Friday. What happens, of course, is that some of the players, and Obviously, one of Rayo Vallecano's strikers is a former Real Oviedo player. There is conversations with Real Oviedo, kind of informally about, the situation's really not very good. And on Saturday morning, at about 10:15, the game was kicking off at 2:00. There was an announcement by La Liga, not by the referee. Normally it would be the referee that would turn up at the stadium and look at the pitch and decide the condition of the stadium, saying that the game was off because the pitch was not safe. Of course, by this point, most of Real Oviedo's fans have arrived in Madrid. Real Oviedo themselves have been in Madrid and stayed the night before, and they turn around and go back to Asturias. Now, the next part of this, and we still won't get into the editorializing, let's give you the basic facts to start with, is that Real Oviedo say that they are now going to appeal for this game to be forfeited by Rayo Vallecano and given to them. La Liga's initial statement talked about finding a new date for the game, but Real Oviedo are saying, no, this isn't about the fact that it was raining. This is because of negligence on Rayo Vallecano's part. So they are demanding that the game doesn't get played at all and that the 3 points are given to Real Oviedo. And that, at the moment, is where we are.
I think regular listeners will probably know, but just to clarify things, Sid supports Oviedo and I'm a Rayo Vallecano season ticket holder. That's why it was a special game for us. That's why we were looking forward to it so much and had organised our weekends around this game. We spoke about our feelings on that diary entry, so I don't want to go too much across this. But God, this is an awful look, Sid, for the league. I mean, forget about Rayo. Rayo are an absolute disaster. They've been a disaster for a long time. We've been telling you about how fundamentally inadequate they are in every single facet of managing the club for years. We've been talking about this for years.
Yeah.
Now everybody can see just how incompetent and absurd the situation is. But this is just looks awful.
Yeah, it does. It really does. And it looks awful for lots of reasons. Let's start with a very basic one, which is that it looks awful because the game doesn't go ahead. And a game doesn't go ahead because the pitch that's been relayed isn't ready yet. I think it looks awful because the announcement of that, despite an awareness fundamentally that there was a problem on the Friday night, doesn't happen until the Saturday, at which point Oviedo are already in the city, Oviedo's fans are already in the city, and it's less than 4 hours till kickoff. So that looks bad. I think it looks bad as well because if you see the statement from La Liga basically said, well, it was raining really heavily. Do you know how many games were cancelled in the whole of Madrid in every single level of football this weekend?
I can tell you my son's under-9s game didn't get...
Exactly. Yeah. So shall I tell you the number of games that were cancelled?
Yes.
1.
Oh.
This one. Rayo Vallecano against Real Oviedo. It's the only game in Madrid that was cancelled. The rain, yes, it's been pissing down with rain for a couple of weeks, and yes, we've complained about it, but the rain was not, if you like, the reason, in that this wasn't having to respond to an emergency, as happened, for example, with the Sevilla game, which was put back a day. And here's the curious thing, by the way. The local authorities in Andalusia had pleaded with that game to be cancelled, and initially La Liga refused. And in the end, bowed down and said, okay, we'll move it to the following day. So that looks terrible as well. And of course, it looks terrible because this creates a situation in which, as you've already said, in terms of what we've talked about over the years with Rayo Vallecano, the terrible thing about this isn't that this is a one-off, is that it actually feels like the inevitable conclusion of something that's been coming for a very long time. And then to look at it from La Liga's point of view, there's also one or two kind of, what would we call this? Legal or jurisdiction doubts. Which is that in theory, La Liga doesn't call off games like this. In theory, this goes through the federation. In theory, this goes through those channels. La Liga
didn't that change?
The La Liga say they have jurisdiction for it, but it's still supposed to go through the federation channels. It's supposed, and La Liga effectively did this unilaterally with Rayo Vallecano. They didn't tell Real Oviedo. They did not tell Real Oviedo. Now, obviously, Real Oviedo talking to some Rayo players informally are aware that there's a potential problem here. I got messages when I woke up on Saturday morning saying, careful, it looks like this game might not happen. And then actually pretty quickly, this game definitely isn't happening. There's that part of it. There is the continued sense that fans are just kind of ignored. The statement from La Liga, I thought, was embarrassingly bad. And I am now editorializing, admittedly. And essentially the tone of the statement from La Liga was, well, they tried. Well, no, I'm sorry. They tried. They didn't start laying the pitch until 4 days before the game. It wasn't finished until the day before the game. That's not good enough. Now, here's some other elements of it. Clubs have a responsibility to have their pitch in in working order, in usable condition. They also have a responsibility to have a contingency plan if that game doesn't go ahead. So, for example, in Rayo's case, maybe the contingency plan is you take it to the Metropolitano, or you take it to Leganés, or you take it to Getafe, but you take it somewhere, you have a backup plan. But Real Oviedo's backup plan, for example, is León Stadium, Cultural Leonesa Stadium. And that didn't happen either. Now then, of course, and I absolutely 100% do not think this is the case, but unfortunately it opens up the interpretation of this being the case. Here's the next thing. Rayo Vallecano had 2 key players out suspended for what is a key game in the relegation battle. Now, apologies, by the way, here, because I promise you I'm not giving you this from an Oviedo perspective, but let's go through this process because I think it's important. If this game is rescheduled in, let's say, for argument's sake, 2 weeks' time or a month's time or whenever, those 2 players will be available. Yeah. This game has changed. The conditioning factors around this game has changed. Now, as I said, I absolutely 100% do not believe that it was done for that reason. But part of the problem is that now La Liga has been put in a position where it can look like that. Or, at the very least, when it can look like, hang on, the club that fucked this up, pardon my French, is the club that's going to benefit from it. And we're in a weird situation, and you tell me, Phil, and I think you will agree with this, but as the Rayo fan, I will see to you now. But I think we're in a situation where there are an enormous amount of Rayo Vallecano fans saying, I really hope they take the 3 points off us because something has to be done. And if we get punished in sport in terms, of course we don't want it. Of course we don't want to go down. Of course we don't want to lose these 3 vital points against a direct rival to avoid relegation. And at the moment, it very much looks like they are a direct rival to avoid relegation. Now, who knows how the season will play out in the end. But I think there are a lot of Rayo fans, and you tell me if this is right, who think, actually, something really bad has to happen to us to try and force some kind of change, with, of course, the fatalism of believing that it won't change anyway.
There we go. I think a lot of Rayo fans think we deserve to have this game forfeited, like, Oviedo deserve to have the 3 points because of everything, the way that it's all been handled. But I don't know or think that too many people expect it to make any kind of change. Yeah.
That's the problem. And it is a really, really terrible look. And look, I'm a bit reluctant to go down this route, and I'm a bit reluctant to say that he's right, but I can absolutely understand it. When you have Santi Cazorla put a tweet out that says the truth is that La Liga is light years away from the Premier League. Now, I understand that he puts this out because of the frustration of this particular moment and the handling of this particular moment. And this is a particularly bad case, this club. And so I don't actually buy his argument here 100%. But I absolutely buy the reason why he said it and the damage it does to La Liga in terms of its image. But to have that kind of thing tweeted out and to have this kind of event happen, I think is really quite significant.
If I speak, I'm in big trouble. I prefer not to speak. If I speak, I am in big trouble. You know what? Speaking about speaking, I was told by a former Rayo player who's still very close to a lot of people in that dressing room, nobody can get hold of the Rayo president.
No,
he's not answering his calls.
Well, by the way, Phil, that includes, as you've just said, people at Rayo. It includes Real Oviedo as well. So in the midst of all of this, Real Oviedo are trying to get an answer and don't get one. Now, I think it's absolutely inconceivable that, never mind the legalities of it, the regulations of it, I think it's inconceivable on a, if you like, a moral level. I don't know, moral's maybe an overblown phrase here, words use it, but on a moral level, that he gets away with it again. And yes, I think he will. And I think this is the other thing in terms of La Liga. I've just said a moment ago that this is a particularly bad case. Rayo Vallecano is a particularly bad case, which we've documented repeatedly over the years. And the most remarkable thing for me is that La Liga, which is very, very interventionist in a lot of things it does, and I think in many ways, rightly so, in terms of trying to get the right things done, in terms of trying to get certain structures, in terms of trying to get certain regulations imposed upon clubs in terms of their match day behaviour at the stadium, things like accesses, the way the stadium looks, the size of advertising boards, all these kind of things. Incredibly interventionist, some would say heavy-handed. Now, for what it's worth, I actually don't think that's a bad thing because I think a league needs that. But why is it that this club, which repeatedly breaks every rule there is that has a stadium that objectively, now we love it emotionally, but that objectively is not worthy of the first division for the players, the fans, the journalists, and everyone. Why does this club keep getting indulged? Why does nothing ever happen when clubs are given fines for all sorts of ridiculously small things, or punishment for all sorts of ridiculously small things? And this one, that does the most basic things wrong repeatedly, has absolutely no comeback.
All right, listen, we're going to leave it there. We could talk more about this, but
we really could, yeah. And I apologise for what maybe feels like a bit of a rant at the start of the show, but I actually think it is really significantly and really important, and I think it matters, and I think it matters to us as well, not because of the game being our game, which of course it is as well, but because we care and we want Spanish football to not be like this.
All right, let's move on and talk about some actual football that was played at Mestalla last night. You were there to witness Real Madrid beat Valencia by 2-0, a 7th successive win for Real Madrid in the league. They're just a point behind leaders Barcelona. The goals coming in the second half from Álvaro Carreras, and obviously, of course, Kylian Mbappe, his 23rd goal in the league, his 38th goal in all comps this season. Alvaro Arbeloa afterwards saying that Mbappe is on course potentially to put up the same kind of numbers as Cristiano Ronaldo or even break his record. You were there, you witnessed it firsthand. I want to talk a lot about Valencia, but we'll get to them in just a second. Let's start with Real Madrid, who continue to not play particularly well.
Yeah, I mean, continue to are really important words there. Because I think you can look at last night's game and you say, well, Bellingham was out, Rodrigo was out, Vinicius was out. Who's going to give them creativity? Of course, it was a fairly plodding sort of performance. Of course, it wasn't very exciting. Because Real Madrid were fundamentally in control for most of this game. Although I think until the goal, Valencia would have felt, actually, this is more or less where we want it to be. Yeah. And by the way, I spoke to Dan Juma after the game for the telly. He was fantastically eloquent and very, very interesting.
He's great. He's very good.
Yeah, really good. Yeah. Really, really good. And very interesting in the way that Valencia approached it. So, yeah, you could say that. And you could say, well, Real Madrid, they put a muscular midfield in. They tightened up the back. It was all defenders. It was relatively cautious. And then you eventually win 2-0. So what more do you want? And you could say, well, as a one-off, away to Mestalla, okay. Away at Mestalla, okay. But this is repetitive. And this has been happening with the players who've got spark and creativity and flair on the pitch as well. And I just don't think Real Madrid are very good. And yet, of course, the results are brilliant. And they are brilliant. Right? The points total Real Madrid are racking up, they're not that far off being on target for sort of 92, 93, 94 points. Possibly even higher. Because actually their results have been good all year. And yet we struggle, don't we, to think of a game. We said, wow, they were good that night.
The 4-0 where they beat Valencia at the Bernabeu earlier this season. And
I suppose you could say Monaco, but that was a slightly weird game. But yeah, and I suppose they won the Clásico. We shouldn't overlook the fact that they won the Clásico. And maybe that's the real thing here, because of course they are 1 point behind Barcelona. You think, wow, it's actually really tight. Now I know it doesn't work like this, but had they lost the Clásico, we're talking about 7 points. And that actually feels like a more faithful reflection of the difference between the two teams. Even though it's only one game's worth of points, obviously being a 6-pointer, being a head-to-head game. But Madrid, I just don't think they were very good. I think they tried again to have Arda Güler at the heart of the play. It was funny last night because it didn't really feel like he was playing from a deeper position to get them playing. And it didn't really feel like he was playing as a number 10 to provide the final pass either. He was sort of doing a bit of both and kind of faded in and out of the game. I must say, I think the semi-good things they did tended to involve him. I'm not saying very much, but tended to involve him and tended to involve Mbappe, who at least was quite mobile, or at least was trying to make things happen. But all in all, I sort of feel like I want to strip it down to the most basic thing of all and just say they're not very good. And yet they sort of are.
Listen, as they say in Spanish, the league tends to put everyone in their place. And I think that at the moment, Real Madrid are just a point behind Barcelona, but I'm pretty confident in saying that I do not think they're going to win the league, because I think that Barcelona are a considerably better team with an idea, with a clear idea, with a group that's been playing together and been playing well for the last 2 years, and with excellent players banging form. So I think there's every reason to suspect that Real Madrid will not keep this going.
There is, except that why shouldn't Real Madrid keep this going? Because, I mean, we're into February. I mean, they've kept it going for a very long time already. And in theory, at least, you would think they will improve at some point, won't they? Maybe they won't. Or maybe the argument is to follow your line, say at some point they will get found out. But then maybe there aren't enough good teams around them for them to get found out. Maybe that's part of the problem.
I heard someone on the radio describing it as, we've got the Scottish League now. We're in a Scottish League with Rangers and Celtic, Barcelona.
It's a line that's been used before, and it comes and goes. And there are moments when I can see the merit to it, and other moments where I can't. I feel like this year, there's a handful of good teams, but it just sort of doesn't get demonstrated, does it?
Yeah, maybe not. Talk to me about Valencia, because I actually think, I've been living in this country, I think 14 years, covered every Valencia Real Madrid during that time. This was maybe the worst Valencia Real Madrid I've covered in terms of a fixture, in terms of quality, in terms of a spectacle. Valencia, we have mentioned their trials and tribulations, a giant of the game in Spain, going through the darkest of times. They're just above the relegation zone, and if that game had taken place and Rayo had managed to get a point off Oviedo, they would be in the relegation zone, Valencia. It felt really hostile towards the home manager and home board last night, more than usual.
I think that's a really important point. Now, it's very difficult, isn't it, to draw a direct and tangible and measurable consequence of, if you like, the context that games are played in and the surroundings. But one of the things that Carlos Corberán, the manager, made a big point of stressing last season when he came in, took them over and did a brilliant job recovering them. Brilliant job pulling them out from near the bottom of the table and putting them very near a European place in the end, was the role that Matchday was going to play. And the noise and the fact that this is a place that other teams are not going to want to go to. It's a place that will create a momentum and a tension and if you like, a kind of an aggression about the team that will be contagious. And one of the things that's really striking is that Real Madrid before last night, I think, had been there, had only won 3 of the last 11 at Mestalla. I think that's right. And that was partly about that environment, about that sense of rivalry, about that sense of imposing yourself on the visiting team, and in particular a team like Real Madrid. And I think you're right that last night, my overall feeling was actually, more than anything else, it was a bit flat. But the moments that there was a lot of noise, it was turned upon Valencia, and it was turned upon Corberán. Of course, it was turned upon the board. It was turned upon it kind of in a just sort of a general sense of frustration and irritation and that we're in trouble again. And of course, as I say, it's difficult to draw a direct consequence, a sort of cause-consequence thing here. But you wonder if actually what was their big advantage last year might turn out to be their big disadvantage this year, because it turns on them. Now, I think actually in those final weeks when it gets really close, I think Mestalla will be on their side because it will recognise the urgency of the situation. But it's hard that for Valencia. And I think the pressure is there, and I think the fear is there, and I think that's the size of this club. And it's one of the things that Dan Juma said yesterday. He said, yeah, it is difficult. He said, but if you're at a club like Valencia, if you can't take the pressure and the fear, you really shouldn't be here, because this is a huge club that deserves more. The other thing that he said, and this feeds into the idea of it being a bit flat yesterday, was that he talked about Valencia's tactical approach. Now, again, as we're talking about this context of this noise, one of the things that has made life difficult for Real Madrid at Valencia is the intensity and the aggression of it, which comes from the context as well as the play. And you've had Valencia at least be aggressive and go at people and fly into challenges and stuff like that. And this game last night didn't even really have the edge. And I thought that was very interesting. It didn't have put bluntly, the dirtiness, the confrontational nature of it that is sometimes there. And what Dan Juma was saying after the game was that when you've got a team like Real Madrid, there's always that thing of thinking we've got to sit deep because they're so good into space and they've got so much talent, you need to protect yourself. And if we step up, then they're going to catch us. But if we stay too deep, they're eventually going to get us as well. And I think what he essentially got at last night was that they thought that somewhere along the line, they could maybe keep Madrid at bay, that they were a little bit frightened of them, but they could maybe keep them at bay. And let's see if a goal comes from somewhere. A corner, a counter-attack or whatever. They really and truly didn't create almost anything. They had the shot against the post from Beltran, and that's the only one I can think of that you would say was genuinely.
They didn't have a shot on target.
Yeah, that was the only one I could think of that was even genuinely an opening, though.
Yeah,
I can't really even think of moments that were openings. Although, Beltran was quite busy in the first 20 minutes or so, and I thought maybe something would happen there. And it didn't. And then, of course, when they did open up, they got caught again, which I suppose reinforces the original idea. Now, this speaks to something that happened last week with Rayo Vallecano, which was Inigo Perez talking about Rayo going to the Bernabeu and going through an emotional process, which was, as the game goes on, you learn not to fear them quite so much. And I just don't think Valencia ever got to the point where they didn't fear them.
No.
Or indeed fear their own circumstances. I think that's probably part of it as well.
The home fans calling for the manager to resign. He was actually asked after the game, are you going to resign? Which is slightly ridiculous.
It was very pointed. I mean, it was repeated, the question, wasn't it? It was like, the last guy who did it did this. Are you going to do it? Why wouldn't you do it? Basically, it was saying, go on, sod off. It was it wasn't the nicest way of putting the question, I didn't think.
I mean, Valencia could do with him resigning. I think they'd be very delighted if he resigned because they obviously are still paying their last manager, Ruben Baraja. They've still got to pay him for another year. If they sack Carlos Bobarán, they'll still have to pay him. And then obviously they'll have to bring in a new manager and pay him. So they'd have to be paying 3 managers at the same time, which isn't likely to happen. So Valencia in all sorts of trouble again.
Yeah, absolutely. This episode, Phil, is brought to you by our friends at NordVPN.
Now, guys, that we travel a lot covering Spanish football. We follow Spanish teams around Europe in the Champions League.
Or going to 3 league games in a weekend, of course, when games aren't cancelled.
Yes, that little caveat. The best way to make sure you've got access to all your content from back home is by using NordVPN.
Which I will be doing this summer, and so will Al when we head to the US for the World Cup.
You can keep up with football or TV shows or movies. I think Sid will mainly be keeping up with football. NordVPN lets you access your subscriptions back home wherever you are.
And it's really easy to use, which is quite important if you're not particularly tech savvy like some of us.
It also improves your internet security, which is important if you spend a lot of time using public Wi-Fi, like at train stations, airports, hotel lobbies.
The kind of places where I spend pretty much 90% of my time.
You can connect with just one click. It's one of the fastest VPNs around, and you can use up to 10 devices with one account. So for more information, and this bit's really important, you need to head to nordvpn.com/TSFP.
There's a 30-day money-back guarantee, and you also get 4 extra months for free. Phil, can you just tell me the link again?
It's in the show notes, but I'll tell you it again. nordvpn.com/TSFP.
Thank you.
All right, let's talk about Barcelona against Mallorca. It finished 3-0 to Barcelona. Again, a pretty slow start from Barcelona. Yeah. Remember, it was 0-0 against Oviedo at half-time. They started slowly against Copenhagen in the Champions League, against Slavia Prague in the Champions League. It has been a facet of their play so far this season. They didn't concede in the first half, which is something that they've been doing a lot this season. And they did actually manage to score with Bobby Lewandowski breaking the deadlock. I think the main thing I want to talk about this game, Sid, is Marc Bernal, because he scored an absolutely brilliant goal. A really nice sort of reaction and celebration from Lamine as well. And you've got a feeling that he's going to be an important player for Barcelona.
Well, he should be. Coming through the academy, he was the captain. He's Lamine Yamal's captain. That's how good a player we're talking about. He started obviously last season at Mestalla on that opening game of the season when Barcelona had a couple of players absent. I think it must have been Frenkie de Jong and Pedri, and I'm not sure who else now. But him and Casado both started and were both really, really good. He then, of course, picks up that terrible knee injury in Vallecas and hobbled out of there on crutches and had to go through a cruciate knee ligament operation, all the rehabilitation, everything that went with it. He said this weekend that that when he scored, he thought about this year and how hard it has been. He actually said as well, I thought about the people around me, some of whom have been going through personal difficulties as well. And so a real sense of kind of this, the meaningfulness of this for lots of people. I think he's a player who has more of, if you like, the Barcelona, classic Barcelona qualities than Casado does. He uses the ball well. I think he reads the game really, really well. I think positionally he's very good indeed. Obviously, the thing that will prevent him playing as much as he would like is A, his age, and B, the quality of the players in front of him. because Barcelona have good midfielders. They have Pedri still to come back. They have Gavi still to come back. They've got, of course, Dani Olmo who can play in there. They've got Frenkie de Jong. We've got Eric Garcia playing in that position. You've got Casado himself in that position. I'm sure I've forgotten someone, but that's already 6. And so there might be a limit to how much of a role he plays, but I think he's very, very talented indeed. And of course, the difficulty now will be getting the continuity to keep taking those steps forward. Now, Flick was post-game, I think, quite keen to say, we're going to take this slowly. We don't want to rush anything because we don't want to take that risk. And also, I suppose, because they're in a position where they don't need to take a risk. And this is always the case with the emergence of young players. Now, obviously, a really amazing young player will emerge early because he's amazing. But quite often it's about the circumstance and about the opportunity being given to you, probably because a team has shortcomings in a certain position or because a team has a series of injuries in a certain position, which is why he started last year. And of course, why he hadn't played for a year, because he himself got an injury.
You mentioned a couple of times there that he is a young player. He's 18.
Yeah.
He's been out for a year and he's still 18.
Exactly.
So,
well, as I say, he was Lamine Yamal's captain. So, this is a guy born in 2007, I think, maybe even 2008. I think 2007, back end of 2007. So there's time. The thing is, there is time, and yet there sort of isn't, because a young player, Dro Fernandez might be an example of this going to PSG. There is that sense for young players that when they break into the team, what they really, really want is to keep getting opportunities. And even if they break in at 17, 18, 19, even 20, 21, there isn't always that sense of, okay, it's all right, I can take my time. Because, of course, if you think you're ready and you're playing well, what you want is to be playing. And the last thing you want is to be caught in this awkward position of having left the B team behind, but not having quite reached the first team enough to get the kind of minutes that means your development will continue at the kind of rate that you want it to continue at.
I think Marc Bernal is obviously a player that the manager really likes. And I think the fact that he started the first 3 games of last season was an indication of just how much the manager likes him. Obviously, Marc Casado was alongside him, and he was very important for the first half of last season. I actually remember Frenkie de Jong didn't start back-to-back league games until February last season because Casado was basically keeping him out of the team when he came back from injury. But Casado has kind of lost his place in the starting 11, obviously, and fallen down the pecking order. Not to say that that's going to happen with Marc Bernal, but Hansi Flick liking you doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to play loads. But I do think that actually he is a big fan of Marc Bernal, and I think he's going to give him minutes, and I think he's going to help him progress.
Yeah. So, I think he will, but of course the bottom line is that the development is important, but winning the next match is always the most important. And then there is also a thing, and I don't know if it gets talked about that much, but the managers do have a degree of, what would you call it, status responsibility, maybe, if you sort of mean. And that it is easier to leave out Bernal than it is, for example, to leave out Frenkie de Jong. Now, that's not me saying that you shouldn't, but it's part of the process of picking your team.
All right, let's move on and talk about what happened at the Metropolitano. Atletico Madrid losing to Real Betis by a 0-0. A really, really nice goal scored by Anthony. Betis learned from their mistakes on Thursday. They were far less open. They were sitting deep. They were hitting Atletico Madrid on the counter-attack. And Cholo Simeone said after the game, they played better than us. They were, they executed their plan very well.
Yeah, and I quite enjoyed Pellegrini trying to say, no, this was the same approach as it always is. No, it wasn't. Yeah. It really wasn't.
Did you hear who was talking after the game? Diego Llorente speaking, and he said there's a thin line between being brave and being suicidal, which I thought was quite a strong phrase to use about your own team in regards to Thursday's game, which they lost 5-0. But
where they were very open, the game was very long, and it was very easy for Atletico to run into space, and so it was different. They were deeper, they were more compact, they were more likely to go into space. And I actually thought there was something very interesting from Simeone post-game as well. And he said, when teams close off against us, we, and I like this point, as a coaching staff, lack the ability to find a way through. And we have to work on that. And we have to give the players solutions. Now, obviously, in part, you're still saying the players couldn't do it. But I thought it was important. He said, we structurally don't have those solutions in that part of the pitch. And obviously it's not helped by the fact that Julian Alvarez is just kind of absent at the moment. He's just not there, really. And I actually think it's not working quite as well as they would hope with Alex Baena, finding the right spaces for him and the right role for him. And they've got a handful of problems there. And, I suppose this is it. If you look at Atletico Madrid's creative players, if creative is the right word, the players who make things happen this year, I would say the best of them is Simeone's son. And he's not a player that's going to get there by guile. As we've talked about lots of times, he's the player who's going to get there by gritting his teeth, by clenching his neck and running like hell. And if you haven't got space to run into, it's quite difficult to do that.
Julian hasn't scored since the 1st of November in the league, so 3 and a bit months without scoring. Physically, it doesn't look amazing, and he's just not being involved in the games. So it's obviously worrying, it's obviously an issue, and it's obviously something that needs to improve if Atletico Madrid are going to have anything other than a highly disappointing season, which at the moment they are trickling towards in the league, 13 points behind Barcelona. Their entire season basically rests on the Copa del Rey semi-final, the first leg of which is on Thursday night at home to Barcelona, which is pretty massive.
Yeah, absolutely. If you are out of the cup and out of the league, all right, still in the Champions League, but you don't really think you can win it, out of the cup and out of the league in the first 2 weeks of February, that is a really poor season.
All right, before we go, this is what happened in the Segunda División. Castellón are top of the table right now. Yes, Castellón are top of the Segunda División after beating Valladolid 4-0. Racing are a point behind them and have a game in hand. They're playing Mirandés this evening. And after them, it's Depor, who beat Albacete 2-1, and Almería, who won 2-1 at Cadiz. We're going to be over at patreon.com/TSFP for the rest of the week. Loads of Spanish football content there, so come and join us from just €4.75 a month. And if you don't want to do that, well, we'll be back on Friday for the preview pod, looking ahead to the weekend's action. So join us then. Adios, amigos.
Cheerio.